Okay, can you all see the actual PowerPoint screen, the presentation? Okay, good. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Like Dr. Butler said, my name is Sheena Aikens. For those of you who haven't been on any of these calls or the meetings, I'm the Deputy Chief Procurement Officer for Cook County Procurement here over all of our operation activities. In this session, we're going to focus on the invitation for bid process from start to finish as part of this series. And again, like Dr. Butler said, we have a couple more coming up. We'll touch on some important things here, but just make sure you guys stay tuned for those other series, especially the one where we're talking about our solicitation documents, getting to know those, what the different parts are, what they mean. I feel like that's a crucial one too. So I'll dive into those, some of the specifics of those on the next meeting, although I may touch on some things today. So keep in mind, if you have questions about those, they will be addressed, but I'll go ahead and get started. So like I said, we're going to be talking about the IFB today, which is a simpler process than the RFP and RFQ that we went over in the last session. Uh-oh, there we go. All right, so what we're going to be discussing today, we're going to define what an IFB actually is as compared to an RFP and RFQ. We're going to go through the difference between scope and specifications. We're going to be talking about the whole entire IFB process from the moment we post to award. And again, keep in mind, there's a lot of activity that takes place before we post to the public, but for the sake of vendors responding, we're going to start these sessions at posting to the public. We're going to go through our bid preferences. I'm not sure if any of y'all have heard of those or know what they are or what they apply to or what they're for. So we'll discuss that because that's a crucial piece. We're going to try to give you guys some useful tips in drafting a response, although we can't tell you how to draft a response or tell you how to formulate a pricing. We can give you some guidelines on how to do so. And then we'll touch on some common challenges and questions that we normally receive from vendors in relation to submitting a bid. So the invitation for bid, or IFB as we'll call it for short, other agencies may call it a bid in general. Um, But what this is, it's the preferred method for acquiring goods and services and some services for public use in which the award is made to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, based solely on the response to the specifications and submittals set forth in the IFB document. So lowest responsive and responsible bidder, that gives us exactly what we're asking for in the bid, right? Openness is achieved by requiring public notice. So we do have to post our competitive solicitations. And again, the IFB is an example of a competitive solicitation. We do have to post those to our Bonfire portal and in the newspaper. Those are required. We also post them on the OCPO website. We give a list of the items that we're posting for a contract opportunity, although you do have to go to Bonfire to view the specifics. Fairness and efficiency are maintained by awarding contracts to the lowest responsive and responsive bidder. Competition is assured by increasing the number of suppliers' interest in bidding on public notices. So that's the outreach that we continue to do. So unlike an RFP where we discussed last week, right? The scope is more complex. With an RFP or RFQ, the county has an end goal in mind, but we're relying on the vendor as a subject matter expert to give us a roadmap on how they think they can best meet that goal for us or best fulfill that contract. The IFB is very different. The award is solely based on price. So we know exactly what we want. We're just, asking you guys to give us your best pricing for it. That's the difference between a proposal and a bid. So the bid, all we're asking you to give us is your price for the line items or the service that we're asking for. And price is the driving factor for award when it comes to a bid. I'll touch on these again. We keep bringing these up, responsive and responsible. They are two very different things. Responsiveness has to do with you guys giving us the documentation that we asked for, right? So the bidder fully conforms in all material aspects to the bid requirements, including the documents and including forms and substance, right? So did you give us the documents that we asked for? The EDS document, your certificate of insurance, your actual bid table, any signatures that we need. That's what we're looking for when we do the responsiveness check to make sure everything was submitted completely and accurately. Responsible has to do with whether or not you're capable to fulfill the scope of work. And that's a different type of review, right? And again, with the IFB, the lowest responsible and responsible bidder is awarded. Pricing and contract terms cannot be negotiated with a bid. So with an RFP, we can negotiate pricing. We normally ask for the best and final, as we discussed in the last meeting. We allow vendors to redline our PSA or our professional service agreement and give us their suggested edits. None of that applies with the bid. What you see is what you have to submit, and that bid document actually becomes the contract, which is very different from the RFP and RFQ process, right? So whatever you submit and sign off on, that's what's going to be posted as your contract. And then again, depending on the dollar amount, anything at $150,000 and above must be submitted for board approval. So let's get into scope versus specifications because there is a difference. So what is a scope of work? It's a written description of contractual requirements for materials or services maintained within the solicitation, or contained, within the solicitation. The SOW is meant to establish a clear understanding of what is needed. So we're letting you guys know the service that is required and how we need you to fulfill that service. We give you location, due dates and timelines and things like that. It encourages competition. It satisfies a critical need in government. And we try to obtain best value for all of our taxpayers when we are drafting our scope of work. When it comes to IFBs, it's typically used for work service contracts, such as landscaping, painting, plumbing, laborers kind of things. Professional services, we don't really do IFBs with those. It's more laborers, things like the things I just named. So those are the type of scopes that you'll see when it comes to an IFB. A lot of times people think that bids are solely commodities, and that's not always true. So I just wanted you guys to know that we do sometimes post services via an IFB. And the scope is also meant to provide guidance to potential vendors on how to meet the need, like I just said. And we detail the things that the vendor is responsible for versus what the county is responsible for when it comes to the scope. Now, specification is something that's totally different. It's a precise description of the physical or functional characteristics of a product or good. So specifications apply to items versus a scope applies to a service. The description of what the purchaser seeks to buy and what the bidder must be responsive to in order to be considered for award. And like I mentioned earlier, it's typically for commodities is when we give specifications. We're trying to describe the exact item or the functionality that we're seeking. And there are 4 different types of specifications that you may see posted in our bids: a design specification, performance specification, a combination of those two, or a brand name or approved equal. And we'll dive into what those are right now. So a design specification establishes the characteristics an item must possess, including details of how it is manufactured. So this is how we need it to be made, down to the very parts, the colors, the sizing. That's a design specification. A performance specification outlines the performance characteristics required to achieve an end result. So that pertains to what we need the item to do, how we need it to serve us. That's the performance specification. That's different than itemizing what we want it to look like or how we want it to be made, as long as it functions the way we need it to. Sometimes you may see a combination of both. So we'll give you guys, we need, a red chair with silver legs and black, wheels at the bottom, where you can lean back in it or move the seat up and down. That's a combination of design and performance specifications, as an example. And then sometimes you may see a brand name or approved equal. So this is kind of to set the standard of quality that we're looking for in the item. And we will let you know in the bid if we will accept a brand name or equivalent. If we don't specify that, you can provide the manufacturer or the parts or whatever you're proposing based on the description that we've given. But sometimes we will say it has to be an Apple MacBook 12.0 or an approved equal. And then it's up to the OCPO and the user department to approve that equal that you guys have submitted. But it's really to define the quality of the product that we want. So now let's get more into the actual IFB process, and we'll start at the public posting. So obviously, like I said, this is a competitive type of solicitation, and we normally post competitive solicitations for 30 days. And within those 30 days, there's a series of events that happen, and I'll get into that in 1 second. But after the public posting, after that 30 days has expired and the bids are due, the buyer will conduct a responsiveness check, and that time frame can vary depending on the number of bids we receive and whether or not we have to secure some items. And I'll get into that in a second also. But depending on what the item is that's missing or the error that took place, we may be able to cure.
Hey, Sheena,
Yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Mm-hmm.
Can you possibly move your microphone closer to your mouth just a little bit? Because I think you keep going down, you go up, then you coming back down again. So just making you aware.
Okay. Sorry about that. Is this
That's
better?
perfect. Yep.
Okay. Okay. I'll keep it on my chin. um, okay. So I'll start this one over. We post to the public for 30 days. We have the buyer do a responsiveness check after bids are received and the solicitation is closed. They're reviewing to make sure you guys have submitted all the documentation that we're asking for. After the responsiveness check and we've determined the recommended awardee or the recommended awardees, if there's more than one, we'll submit those bids to our background check department and to compliance so they can review the utilization plan. Once we have all of those items approved, the buyer will make the recommendation like, hey, based on the background check and the bid amounts, these are the vendors that, we're recommending for award. They'll let the user department know. And then the user department gives OCPO the green light to actually execute the contract. If the contract is at 150,000 or above, it does require board approval. And once the board approved, the CPO, our Chief Procurement Officer, will execute the contract, and then the contract and the PO are sent to the vendor so they can start the work. That's the green light for the vendor to actually begin work or to start delivering services. And the total estimated timeline from posting to finish is about 7 months, just so you guys are aware. 30 days of that is 1 month of that is posting to the public. There's another month for the utilization plan review. And another month for the board review. That's 3 months minimum outside of all the other reviews that have to take place, just so you guys are aware. Where's my mouse? Here we go. Okay. So after we have posted to the public and it's open, we normally have to post in our Bonfire vendor portal, which some of you may be familiar with, on our homepage. And again, that's just a summary of the solicitation. There aren't very many details on our homepage. And we also place an ad in the Chicago Tribune a couple of days before we actually open a solicitation, so everyone's aware. For 30 days, we do have to post, and within that 30 days, we will have our pre-bid conference or a site visit if that's applicable. If it's for work services that have to take place at a certain county location, sometimes the buyer will require you all to come and view that location so you have an understanding of the layout. And that's normally 1 week after posting. So the pre-bid conference allows vendors to gain clarity on the scope or the specifications, the requirements, and any submittal documents that may be needed for that particular project. So we do encourage vendors to attend the pre-bid conference because it helps you get a better understanding of how to submit. The buyer will answer any questions that they are able to. We cannot answer any questions related to changing the scope or how to submit your pricing, but understanding our documents and what we're asking for, we can answer those questions. After we host a pre-bid conference, normally we open our portal up for vendors to ask questions, right? So this is the vendor inquiry period, which is normally 2 weeks after posting or a week after the pre-bid conference. And you can submit your questions regarding scope, required documents, anything that wasn't addressed in the pre-bid conference. You can ask them directly to the buyer in Bonfire. You don't have to send emails anymore. You don't have to go outside the system. Everything that is needed to process or ask questions of a procurement, you can do directly in Bonfire. So after the vendors have asked all of their questions and we have compiled a list of everything, we route them for review to all the user departments responsible for answering the questions, depending on the nature. And then we post the response to those questions in the form of an addendum. And that's only 3 weeks after posting or 1 week after the questions were due. If we need to extend the due date because for some reason the questions were too complex and it took us longer to answer them, or we noticed that there was something missing in the bid that we wanted to add, we may extend the due date. But all of that would be posted in the form of an addendum. And then normally up to a week after that, the responses will be due and they have to be submitted electronically in Bonfire by the due date and time listed on the solicitation. So the pre-bid conference that I touched on a second ago, what that is, it's a meeting held by the buyer with potential bidders prior to the due date of the solicitation for the purpose of answering questions, clarifying any ambiguities, and responding to general issues in order to establish a common basis of understanding of all of the requirements of the solicitation. So it's a great way for you guys to really understand what the ask is. Any questions to the using agency? Because normally the using agency, a representative for procurement, a representative from our ethics department, and a representative from compliance. Most of the departments that have to review your submittal documents will be on the call to answer questions regarding the items that they have to review and the requirements that they have. So it's a good place to gain that understanding by attending the pre-bid conference. Now, the site visit is something different, or sometimes called a site inspection. This does not apply to all of our IFBs. It really applies to IFBs where there may be a location involved for work services, for example. So painting, plumbing, electrician, pest control, things like that, landscaping. Some of those have required a site visit. So you guys can get an idea of the layout, the entry points, anything like that. So it's a good idea to attend those site visits if you are not familiar with the space already. Sometimes the incumbents do not attend because they already know, so that you can get an understanding of the layout of the lay of the land. And this will help you formulate your pricing, understanding all the work that has to be entailed in that location. So that is the purpose of a site visit. And again, it's not required for everyone, but when it is, you'll be notified in the bid. And there's an additional document that will have to be completed and submitted to us saying that, yes, I did attend this site visit. I understand the layout of this space in order to submit my bid. So now let's dive into responding to an IFB, a couple of tips that we can give you. And again, I know Dr. Butler touched on this before, and I've touched on it before. We can't tell you guys how to respond. That's a conflict. We can give you guidelines on how you should be formulating your documents, or what you can do to assist in your documents. So I'll touch on these again. We went through these in the last couple of presentations, but the submittal requirements for an IFB at a minimum are the pricing sheet or bid table. Not submitting that is an automatic non-responsive. The economic disclosure statement, not submitting that or executing that is automatic non-responsive. Your certificate of insurance. Now, we don't require you to have all of the coverage that we're asking for in the solicitation on the certificate of insurance that you submit with your bid. We will require you to have the coverage if you are awarded. So when we ask for the COI, we just need to see that you have insurance as a company in general. We just need the evidence. So that's the difference between, submitting a COI with your bid and submitting it with when we award the contract. Your information for subcontractors form, and that we need one for every sub that you plan on using. Your utilization plan for compliance. If it's applicable, a bid bond. And then the addenda acknowledgement form is also critical also. This is just you guys letting us know I have read all of the responses to the questions and I understand if there are any changes, what they are. And then any other documents as requested, which could be, depending on the scope or the nature of the project, maybe one or two items different from what's on this list, but at a minimum, you'll have these things listed here required to be submitted with your bid. So now let's get into the bid table. We get a lot of questions about, I don't know how to, formulate my pricing, how to incorporate all of my costs. And again, I can't give you a formula for that, but what I can say is your pricing should incorporate any and all costs that are required to fulfill the requirements of this solicitation. That includes your cost for the goods and services, any transportation or delivery costs. So if every time you deliver or bring a product to us, you have to pay for gas or you have to pay postage, you can incorporate that. If we're asking for any training for any of the projects that you're doing, if you have to have special equipment to fulfill this contract or any materials you need, the cost of the labor associated with it, especially if you're using subs, the insurance you're required to have, especially if you are the recommended awardee, you have to have certain coverages that are listed in the IFB. And that does cost money. So you incorporate that into your cost. Any applicable taxes, warranties we're asking for, and then also incorporate your overhead or profit. So all of that should be included in your unit price when you post your bid. I hope that is helpful. Like I said, we can't give you guys the specific formulas or tell you guys what to include, but just account for everything that it is costing you to fulfill this contract. That can all be written into your bid. Keep in mind, pricing is non-negotiable, but we do want you to remain competitive. So like I said, understanding the cost that you have to incur for each unit, the fees associated with having the contract in general, your profit margin, and make all of that a part of each of your unit costs. Make sure you do your research too, and I pointed this out before, that sometimes our needs do change and pricing may change, but it's a good idea to take a look at our previous or current contracts for whatever service or good you are trying to be a bid on. So that way you have an idea of how pricing was set up before, so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And our awarded contracts and amendment page that we have posted on our website is a good place to start. You can filter by department, by contract type, by commodity code, and we actually give all of the bid tables and payment schedules associated with that contract. They're written in that document. So you can see what other vendors have charged or what the county has been paying for whatever good or services that you're interested in. All right, now bid preferences. I do think it's important to touch on this, and all of them are also listed on our website and in our bid documents, but let me just show you guys what bid preferences are, what they're for, and how they're useful to you. Again, they only apply to IFBs. We don't do these for any other type of solicitation. So vendor preferences or bid preferences are credits offered credits off of the or discounts offered on pricing for approved vendors whose company meets the requirements for that credit. And I'll go through what each of those credits are in a second. The discount is applied to the overall bid price to aid in being the lowest responsive bidder. So it's used for the determinant for award. The bid tabulation that we post and the actual contract amount will not include the credit. Those will be posted as the actual vendor's proposed pricing. So what that means is, and let me just explain. So how the credit works, let's say you guys are bidding $100,000 for one of our work service contracts, and you applied for our local business preference, which is 10%, right? What that means is we're going to base your award amount, the determinant for award amount, off of $90,000, because 10% off will be $10,000 off of 100, right? So your award amount is going to be the $90,000. Your contract will still be $100,000, but let's say, for example, your bid came in at 100,000, and there was another one at 95,000 right below you. But because you apply for that preference and you want it, we'll make that award determination for you at $90,000. So you actually beat the apparent lowest bidder. Your contract will still be for the 100,000. I hope that makes sense. But it's an incentive to help in getting the award and being the lowest bidder. That's how the credits work. And they range from 0.5% to 10%, depending on the credit. They cannot be combined. You can only be approved for one. And they can be found, the applications and the list of preferences can be found, one, on our website, in the instruction for bidders section in the bid, in exhibits 4 through 6, and then also in the economic disclosure statements. There's a couple of different places where we have the applications. And when we get into the session where we're going through all of our documents, I'll show each of those applications to you all. If there are any questions about that, please let me know before I move on. I don't want to forget to respond to any questions.
You made a reference to, like, once you can go in there and see the previous bids, where do we find that information at? I'm sorry, that was the last slide. I
No,
apologize.
it's okay. So we do post the actual awarded contracts. The previous bids may not be available online anymore once the solicitation closes, but you can see the actual contract. I'll put the link in the chat at the end of the discussion, but it's on our homepage. And so if you go to the main OCPO homepage, you'll click on procurement data and information. And there's a link that says awarded contracts and amendments. That's where you'll find all of our awarded contracts from today all the way back to, I think, 10 or 15 years. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. All right, drop your comments in the chat if I move forward and you guys think of any questions about the bid preferences. But now let me get into what those preferences actually are. Uh-oh, let me get this off my screen. There we go. Okay.
Hey, Sheena.
Yes.
Before you move on, Natasha is asking if you can repeat the example that you just stated regarding being awarded 100K, but the contract being for 90K. She wasn't sure she understood it.
Okay.
Fully.
So let me go back to this next screen. The local bid preference is 5%, right? We'll just say 10% to be easy. Let's say you applied for a preference, whichever one, and you were awarded that 10% preference. The bid that you submitted, the cost of your bid is $100,000. The way we'll make the award determination is with that 10% credit. So it's like a discount for the award. So the amount that we're going to base our award decision on is $90,000. That does not mean that your contract is going to be $90,000. Your contract is still going to be what you submitted in your bid, which was $100,000. But with that credit, the award decision is $90,000. So let's say you bid $100,000, another company bid $95,000. The apparent lowest bidder would be the $95,000 bid. That would be what would typically win. But with your credit, we're going to base your award amount on $90,000. So you would beat the apparent lowest bidder with that preference. Your contract will still be $100,000 though. Does that make sense? It's an incentive, not money off of your contract. It's an incentive to help you win the bid. Does that help for the person who asked that
Yes,
question?
thanks for
Okay.
that clarification.
Yeah, okay. Stop me again if I need to explain that, because I know it can be a little complicated, but the incentive is purely that it's not going to be taken off of your bid amount. It's just to help you win based on the discount. Okay. And so the local business preference is 5%, and that's awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder who has a local business located within Cook County. And there's a document you fill out with the location of the business and the PIN number so that it can be verified. But if you are awarded that preference, you will get 5% discount on your price. The eligible veterans preference is also 5%. So it's given to a veteran business enterprise or a service disabled veteran business, which has a home office in the state of Illinois and is also responsive and responsible. So again, just because you apply for the credit doesn't mean you'll win the award or you'll win that credit in general. But if you do win the credit and you are awarded a contract, you have to be responsive and responsible. I want to make sure that we clarify that too. The veterans workforce preference is 1%. The contractor for current bids who submits an affidavit with bid proposal committing to utilizing eligible veterans for at least 5% of the labor hours of a public works contract shall be given this preference. So this only applies to public works, but you get a 1% credit if you use eligible veterans for at least 5% of the contract for a public works contract. Businesses owned by people with disabilities, that credit is 5%. And it's for a bidder who is a person with disability owned enterprise, provided that the bid of such bidder does not exceed the bid of the lowest responsive and responsible bidder by more than 5%. So for example, back to that $100,000 example I gave, if your bid was $100,000 and the next lowest bid was $90,000, with that 5%, you won't beat out that next lowest bid, even though you got the credit. I hope that makes sense, but it has to be within a certain range of the apparent lowest bidder for this particular credit. And so there's a couple more. The social enterprise preference. So this one is awarded to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, which is a social enterprise with the majority of its regular full-time workforce located within Cook, DuPage, Kane, Lake, McHenry, or Will County, so long as the bid does not exceed the lowest bid by more than 5%. So if you are a social enterprise and you're in one of these 4 or 5 counties, you can apply for this preference. The apprenticeship earned credit, which is 1/2 to 1%. Contractors employing apprentices as defined by the code may qualify for the earned credit. 0.5% if apprentices perform between 5 to 10% of the total labor hours, and 1% if the apprentices perform more than 10% of the total labor hours for a public work contract of $100,000 or more. And again, if you guys have any questions, you can put them in the chat or let me know after the fact. All of this information is also on our website, and more details about these definitions are on the actual applications that I'll show you guys in the next session. The reentry employment earned credit, which is 0.5 to 1%. Contractors who utilize former offenders as defined by the procurement code to perform 5 to 10% of the total labor hours for a public works contract of $100,000 or more shall receive this credit of 0.5%. Contractors who use former offenders for 10% or more of the total labor hours will receive 1%. So the more that they work on the contract, the better your chances are of getting a higher percentage with some of these credits. And this is valid for 3 years after the date of issuance of the bid opportunity. And then two more. The youth employment earned credit, which is 0.25% to 0.5%. Contractors employing youth as defined in the procurement code may qualify for the credit of 0.25% if the youth perform between 1 to 10% of total labor hours, and they'll get a credit of 0.5% if the youth perform more than 10% for a public works contract of $100,000 or more. And then the last one is the recycled designated products. So this one is 10% or more. This is the highest one. If the lowest price offered for a recycled designated product is not more than a specified percentage higher than the lowest offered price for the same designated product that is not recycled, the offered price for the recycled designated product shall be considered the low bid. So sometimes we do ask for, when it comes to paper products, we'll ask for the pricing for recycled paper and the pricing for non-recycled paper. That's what this is referring to. And so we'll give the discount if the pricing for the recycled paper is a certain percentage less than the non-recycled paper. And this specified percent will not be more than 10% of the total bid. So again, I'll show you guys what those applications look like and where you can find them in the next session, but it is a good idea that you guys are aware that these are out there and that you can take advantage of these preferences. And regardless of the percentage that you're awarded, it won't be taken off your contract amount. It's just a discount towards the award decision. And again, you can only apply for or be approved for one at a time. Even if you apply for more than one, you'll only be approved for one at a time. Okay. So now responses are due. The portal is closed. You guys can no longer, the portal is about to close and you guys will no longer be able to submit. So you have to actually submit your responses in Bonfire. We are only accepting electronic submissions in Bonfire. Every now and then we do get the question, can we email our bids or our responses? And the answer to that is no. You have to submit in our e-procurement system. You're able to view a summary of the solicitation by clicking on View Opportunity. And again, once we dive into our websites and forms, I'll show you what this looks like. But in order to view the specific requirements, that means the actual documents you have to submit, the actual solicitation, and the actual bid table, you have to click on Start Submission. So this is why we recommend that you register before you're interested in bidding, because you have to have an account in order to view specifics for a solicitation. Anyone can view the opportunity itself, the summary, but to see the specifics, you have to have an account with us. All of the required fields must have a document uploaded in order to complete the submission. And you'll notice that they have a green required button next to it. And some of them may have a white button that says optional. Those are at your discretion. But if it has required, you have to put something in that slot in order to move forward and submit your bid. Bonfire will not allow you to leave those items blank. You are able to make changes up to the due date and time of the solicitation close date. So if you submit a week in advance and you remember that you forgot to submit like your COI, for example, you can go back in and add that document. Just make sure every time you touch your response, you hit resubmit, because when you do touch it, it pulls it back into draft state, because technically you're still working on it, or you began working on it again and it's not a final completion. So if you do make any edits before the due date and time, make sure you hit resubmit every time, because I won't be able to see it. The buyers won't be able to see it if it's in draft state. It'll show pending submission on our end until it closes. Once it closes, that pending goes away and it's like it never existed to us. I just want to make sure we point that out to everyone so that you all know. We've had that question before. I submitted my bid early. I did make a change, but I had already submitted, so I thought it just went through. That's not how it works. Every time you touch it, resubmit. Okay, so let's dive more into the IFB process after the due date. So after the bid closes, again, we talked about the buyer responsiveness check. That's when they're checking to make sure that you guys submitted all the documentation that we asked for. And as I mentioned earlier, some things are curable, meaning that we can reach out to you for corrections. For example, If you submitted your EDS and the final execution page is signed, but you forgot to put your email address somewhere, or just the secretary forgot to sign on the correct line or something like that, we can cure items like that. So if we do ask secure, we'll reach out to the vendor who submitted the bid and say, hey, can you correct this? Or this was filled out incorrectly, A, B, or C was missing, and we'll ask you to cure that. But non-responsive proposals will not be considered or evaluated. So again, not submitting your bid table pricing, not completing that EDS or fully executing or signing it, some of the notaries missing, those are things that would deem you non-responsive. Making a small error or a small oversight is different than not submitting. I just want to point that out. We can't cure it what you don't submit. So keep that in mind also. And that's something that the buyer looks for on every single submission. After the responsiveness check, the buyer will conduct and we determine the lowest responsive bidder, we conduct the background check, where we check the awarded vendors to make sure that we verify that they're in good standing with the Secretary of State or the state of Illinois. The vendor does not owe any back child support or state taxes, that the wage theft ordinance is being met, and we have a department that checks that for us, that there are no familiar relationships with county officials or employees, and if they are disclosed, they have to be approved by our ethics department. So that economic disclosure statement, I keep getting back to the EDS document, that is important for your background check. If that is not filled out correctly, we can't move forward with the background check, and without the background check, we cannot recommend you for award. So whenever you have questions about how to complete that document, please reach out to your buyer. They can't tell you what to put on each line, but they can guide you through what the documents mean. So make sure that that EDS is on point. And again, we're going to dive into that in a lot more detail in the next session. So please don't miss the session where we talk about our websites and our documents, because I will explain the EDS in that session. So in conjunction with doing the background checks, we'll also do the compliance utilization plan review. So we send your MBE documents to our compliance department, and they review for, all of the things that they need to approve, and they'll let us know whether or not the vendor is approved to move forward with award or not. Those MBE documents are required with your response, and it's comprised of typically 4 documents. There's utilization plan form 1. There's a letter of intent, which is form 2. There's a petition for partial or full waiver, which is form 3. And if you submit form 3, you also have to submit a good faith effort transparency report. Hopefully, we only get form 1 and 2 because we encourage you guys to utilize MBE vendors. But if you don't have the ability to do so, you can note why in that good faith effort on that waiver. The utilization plan will be reviewed by the Office of Contract Compliance for the approval based on the MBE goals that were outlined in the solicitation document. And those do vary depending on the specification or the scope. Normally it's up to 35%, but it could be less than that depending on the nature of the project. And again, like I said, if you're unable to meet the required goals, you have to demonstrate due diligence with that good faith efforts report. So once we've got all the approvals and we have the background check is complete, our compliance review is complete, we have the lowest responsive bidder, this is when we'll work with the user department to get the recommendation for award. So we'll let the user department know that, hey, this company, they passed all the background checks, they're the lowest responsive bidder. The user department will normally give us a formal letter saying, yes, we agree with the decision, move forward with executing the contract. And then upon approval of that is when we start actually drafting the contract or putting the contract together for execution. Any vendors that are not recommended for award will be notified via a formal letter around the board date, because again, we can't really let the public know of a decision until the board has approved it. So I want to point that out too. It may not come right when we've recommended the award to the user department, but you will get that notification around the board approval date. All right. So next I'll get into board approval and contract creation. So like we said, the board approval is required for contracts that have a value of $150,000 and above. Below that, they can go directly to our Chief Procurement Officer for signature. But keep in mind that board approval does add another month to the timeline because we only have a board meeting once per month, excluding August. The CPO can only execute a contract after the board has made an approval, and depending on the nature of the scope, sometimes the board does have additional questions and they need an additional meeting to make that approval. So we want to keep that in mind also. That's normally for more complex projects, but I do want to point out that that can happen. And again, the bid document does become the contract. So that is what the vendor and the CPO will sign. And once the CPO has executed the contract and the PO are both sent to the awarded vendors. And that is the green light to go ahead and start performing services or delivering the goods requested in the RFP once you receive the executed contract and PO from OCPO. So really quickly, I'll get into some common challenges and questions that we have had from vendors when trying to submit a bid. I feel like these will be some helpful tools for you also. So the first, and I think I kept touching on this before, we get some bids that have incomplete or missing submittal requirements. Now, I know that I said that any field in Bonfire that has the word required next to it has to have something submitted in that slide in order to complete your submission. But those documents depend on how the buyer itemizes the submittal requirements. So some buyers only require you to have a document for the bid table and a document for the entire bid package in general. Other buyers will require you to itemize that. So they may want the bid table. They may want an EDS as a separate one. They may want the ISF as separate. They may want the compliance document separate so they can check off that you submitted everything. So this error normally happens in those solicitations where everything is not itemized. You can lump it all together. But sometimes vendors may accidentally leave out something when they're copying and pasting or scanning everything as one document. So keep that in mind too. Sometimes we can cure, sometimes we cannot. So just make sure that you have your own checklist of things that you must submit with your bid to make sure that you have given us everything that we're asking for. The biggest challenge that we have had with any solicitation of any kind is that EDS document. 99% of the time that document is filled out incorrectly. The only time we have noticed that it is correct is when a vendor already has a contract with us and they've done it several times before. 99% of the time, though, that document is filled out incorrectly. And that's not to say anything about the individuals filling it out. That document is complicated. Even for us, sometimes it's complicated to review. So again, if you guys have questions about that document, if you're unsure about anything, please reach out and ask. We're happy to help you, to guide you through how to complete that document and to let you know what each of the forms within that document are for. But just make sure that you guys are at least attempting to complete it as thoroughly as you can, because depending on the type of company that you have and the beneficiaries and the ownership of that company, subsequent documents may also be needed for your beneficiaries or people who have interest in your company. So keep that in mind also. And again, I'll dive down into that more when we have the session on our solicitation documents, because this document is very complex. So I want to make sure that you guys are really paying attention. This is just as important as your pricing above anything else. Keep that in mind too. It's all important, but this document is crucial for award determination. Another challenge that we have is the vendor timeliness when we're asking to cure an item. Remember, I stated that sometimes, depending on if it's an oversight or an obvious error, we can ask you guys to cure. The buyer will reach out to that vendor and say, hey, your EDS was missing your secretary's signature on page 6 or something like that. And the longer that it takes a vendor to get us that document back, the more it holds up the award decision for this project. So keep that in mind also. If the buyer reaches out to you all, make sure you respond as quickly as you can, or at least give them updates if you can't respond in the time frame that they have given you when they reached out to you all. Another challenge is some of the documents are lacking the proper contact information. And what I mean by that is the umbrella company that is applying to do business might not be the individual that we reach out to when we have questions about the bid. A lot of times we've seen that the company secretary or some clerks or an assistant will fill out the documents and will leave their information, but that might not be who we reach out to cure items. So make sure that you are listing the people who the buyer should reach out to if they have questions or need to contact you, because that can take an additional time also off of our timeline if we have to find or constantly be re-navigated to the proper person to reach out to for if we're trying to cure, for example. Another challenge that we've had is the bid table or the pricing sheet might not be filled out correctly. Sometimes and this is something to pay close attention to. We may ask for a unit price for every single one item, or we may ask for the pricing for a quantity of items. Pay attention to that also. We've had vendors make mistakes where they thought that they were supposed to give us a unit price, like one widget is $2, but we really asked for the price for 200 widgets, which is obviously not $2, right? We probably can't reach out to cure that, so you might not be able to fix that amount. So we want to make sure that you are reading the bid documents and reading the bid table appropriately and giving the pricing that we're asking for. Sometimes it's for one item, sometimes it's for a list of a quantity of items. So make sure you pay attention to that also. Or we may ask for a percentage of a certain pricing. We've done that a lot too. And vendors will enter a whole dollar instead of a percentage, and that'll make their whole bid amount 4 or 5 times what it should be. So make sure that you guys are paying attention to that also. And then the last challenge that one of the last challenges that we have is vendors are requesting the status of a project sometimes a little too soon, right? And this happens because normally we post the bid tabulations, which is only a list of the vendors who submitted and the pricing that they proposed. We post that to our website within 48 hours, so 2 business days. So sometimes when vendors see that, they'll say, oh, I see that I was the lowest bidder. Where's my contract? Doesn't work that way. We still have to do the background check, the compliance review, the recommendation with the department, and the board approval if required. So just make sure, that's why we go through the timeline in so much detail, so that you guys know, just because we posted the list of the respondents doesn't mean that you're going to get a contract the next day, or maybe even not the next week or month, because there's so much that goes on behind the scenes while getting that contract executed. It's perfectly fine for you all to reach out to the buyers to ask for a status, but I just don't want you guys to be frustrated if we can't give you one. Because until we actually make the award and execute that contract and get board approval, we can't tell you what the award decision is by code. So a lot of vendors get frustrated when they say, well, what's the status? Where is it at? And all we are allowed to say is that it's under evaluation or it's being reviewed by code. That's all we can say until the board makes a decision, or if it's below 150,000, until the CPO executes. So just wanted to point that out too. Okay. And so now I'll dive into some of the common questions that we get from vendors. And we'll get into how to navigate some of these questions and concerns. So the first one being, how do I view the actual solicitation document and bid table? And I went through that earlier when I talked about Bonfire, right? So you can log into Bonfire and click view opportunity next to that particular project. All that's going to do is open a summary. It'll say they're asking for landscaping services. It's due on the 10th. And questions are due on the 8th. That's all it's going to tell you. In order to actually see the solicitation and the bid tab, you have to actually click start submission. And I just want to make sure that that's very clear. That's the number one question we get when people are trying to view documents in Bonfire. You physically have to start submission. You don't have to submit it yet if you're not ready, but starting the submission will open up all the specifics for that project. Another question we get is, I'm registered in Bonfire. Why didn't I receive the notice of this opportunity? That can be for 2 reasons. And I mentioned before, Bonfire is a system that a lot of agencies use. And there are a few agencies, especially public agencies in the city of Chicago, that use Bonfire. Like Chicago Public Schools, for example, or city colleges. I know they just recently started using Bonfire. But each of those entities has their own Bonfire portal. So just because you might have registered with CPS's Bonfire portal does not mean you're going to see opportunities. You absolutely will not. You have to register on Cook County's Bonfire portal in order to see Cook County's opportunities. So if you're registered in Bonfire in general, you're not receiving our opportunities, that could be one of the reasons why. You have to be registered specifically with our portal, because the portals across the city do not communicate, even though they're under the umbrella of Bonfire. The other reason for that might be your commodity codes. So for example, I said, I think in the first or second meeting, to register, when you register with Bonfire, select any and all commodity codes that could potentially get you business or get you notices, right? So if you are in the business of, construction, for example, make sure you have codes for electricians, plumbing, lumber, parts and supplies, anything that pertains to construction, so that you're notified whenever we post an opportunity, because then those notices come from the commodity codes, right? We don't send them to specific vendors directly because we don't know the business that you are in, the area of business that you're in. So we're basing our solicitations off of those commodity codes, and we do use the UNSPC commodity codes. I can put that link in the chat again if you guys need me to. But that's the second reason why vendors don't get notified if they are registered with the Cook County Porters, because they did not select enough commodity codes or the correct commodity codes that apply to their area of work. Another question, I was attempting to submit my response before the deadline, but it didn't go through. Can I still submit? The answer to that is no. And we keep stressing to make sure you give yourself enough time before that due date to submit your response, because once that due date, once the clock ends, if you're in the middle of submitting and you haven't physically submitted, you won't be able to. So if the bid is due at 10 o'clock, don't wait till 9:55 to start uploading, because the more and more time, the more and more people or companies that are trying to upload, the slower the system is going to get, obviously because of internet bandwidth, I guess. But make sure that you give yourselves enough time before that due date so that you don't get cut off, because there's nothing we can do if time runs out and you have not physically submitted your bid. All right. And so another question, I completed my response, but my company was not on the bid tab. So this gets back to the thing that I was saying earlier about make sure if you make any changes, you resubmit. And this actually happened to us recently. A vendor called and was like, I don't see my name on the bid tab. I know that I submitted my bid last week. And so we asked him, to make sure he showed us the email confirmation. He said, well, I did go back in and try to edit one of my documents. But all I did was attach it to the bid that was already submitted. That is not how it works. Anytime you touch your bid or your response, you have to resubmit. We cannot see it if you don't. So keep that in mind also. If you notice that you did submit a bid and you made any changes and you don't see your name on the bid tab, that's probably the reason why. Another common question that we get is, I'm having difficulty navigating Bonfire. Can I just email my response? Obviously, the answer to that is no. Things have to be submitted in Bonfire. But if you are having difficulty, we have an admin team that can help guide you through how to upload, what to click on, what everything means in Bonfire. Or you're free to reach out to the buyer also. But we cannot accept bids via email. We are not taking paper bids. They have to be submitted in Bonfire. And then the last question that we get, well, one of them is, I see that my bid price was the lowest, based on the bid tab. I see that my bid price was the lowest. Why didn't I receive the contract? This goes back to being responsive and responsible. So this actually did happen to us, where a vendor was like, I was the lowest, my pricing was beyond anyone else's. Why didn't I get the contract? They tried to protest. Well, the reason was they didn't actually submit the specifications that we were asking for. And back to that example where I said that we are asking for black chairs with silver handles and black wheels, and you give us brown chairs with gold handles, you're not responsible, because that's not what we asked for. So that would be the reason why, if your pricing was low, you didn't get the actual bid, because you didn't provide the items that we asked for in the actual bid. Any questions about any of that? Okay. So in summary, the IFB, as we mentioned before, it's a form of a competitive solicitation, meaning we post to the public and give everyone the same opportunities to submit. They have to submit the same requirements and meet the same specifications in order to be considered for award. Pricing and the scope or the specifications of a bid are non-negotiable. That's very different from an RFP or RFQ, where those things are negotiable depending on the evaluation. What we ask you for is what you have to submit, unless we specify brand name or approved equal. If we don't specify that, what we're asking for in that bid, you have to submit those exact specifications. Responses must be submitted directly in Bonfire. We will not take emails or paper. With a bid, like I said, there's no evaluation at all. There's no review process. We're simply awarding to the lowest responsive and responsive bidder. That's who's going to get the contract. And then again, the bid document is what actually becomes a contract, which is very different than an RFP or RFQ. Are there any questions about anything we just discussed, or things that you guys have questions about that I didn't mention, or anything you want me to recover while we're still on the call? I try to leave a little extra time for questioning this time, because we normally run out. So any questions at all?
It looks like Natasha had a question. Natasha, if you want to come off mute and ask your question.
Sure. I just wanted to know as far as when to apply for the bid preferences that you kind of listed. Is it while you're submitting for the
Yes.
bid?
Yeah, so they should be submitted with your bid response at the time of submission. Yes.
I don't see any other questions in the chat. Is there anyone who's attending who wants to come off or mute? You can raise your hand and we can get your question answered if you'd like to openly ask it. Okay, well, I don't see any questions as always. Thank you so much, Sheena. Presentations are always comprehensive, always thorough, very appreciative. Again, you all, as a recap or to recap, you will receive an email, follow-up email tomorrow morning sometime. And that follow-up email will include the recording link on our YouTube page. You'll also be able to look at the other recorded videos from part 1 and part 2, which were also equally good, full of information. So you'll get that. You'll also get a copy of the chat notes. You will also, so in the chat, we also, I tried to drop the links of some of the stuff that Sheena was talking about. I don't think there was anything else that Sheena was going to drop in the chat. I can't remember, Sheena, if you were going to drop anything in the chat, but I did drop the CPO page. I also dropped where you could find the previous awarded contracts. I dropped that in there.
Okay.
And don't know if you want to drop the Bonfire link in there.
I can do that.
We normally drop that in the other chat. So if you want to drop that in there, I think that's probably it. And let's see. So you'll get the follow-up email. You'll get the chat notes. I'll also include in the email the links to the last 2 trainings that will be next Tuesday. So this week we had it on Wednesday. We normally have them on Tuesday. But this week we had them on Wednesday. So next week it'll go back to Tuesday, and the following week it'll be on Tuesday as well from 1 to 2:30. So please make sure that you make that adjustment. And if you have not registered for those trainings, please make sure that you do that.
Hello.
Yes.
Hi, I have a question. Can you let me know where I would be able to begin for contracting for a landscaping company?
So, let me show you guys our Bonfire page really quickly. This is where you would start. So what I would say is register here on our Bonfire vendor portal. There's a link at the top. If you have not already registered, it'll ask you to. And then this is where you can see all of our contract opportunities. We don't have anything for landscaping posted at the moment, but that doesn't mean we won't anymore. But yeah, you're free to look here just to see what the opportunities are that we have posted. Again, when you click view opportunity, it's going to open the summary for you for that opportunity, just with like basic information in order to actually view. And here's what I meant when I said sometimes the buyers itemize the required documents they want you to submit instead of lumping it together. But at the bottom down here, oh my goodness, a lot of people looked at this. This is where you actually will click to see the actual documents when you prepare submission. So now you can see you're able to upload documents. You can download any documents that you need to. This is where you would do that. So I would start with Bonfire. And like Dr. Butler said, let me put the link in the chat really quickly before I forget. And just make sure you guys are keeping up to date on opportunities that we have posted. Where's the chat? There we go. All right. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, thank you so much.
No problem.
Let me take myself off mute. So one other thing that I want to make sure is mentioned that we're working on for the future, and when I was talking to Rafi, the Chief Procurement Officer, and even having a conversation with Sheena as we were planning for this, one of the things that we are currently focused on, my team is working on putting together is some webinar trainings. If you all don't know, we have what was a quarterly fireside procurement chat with Rafi, who's the Chief Procurement Officer, and Nicole, who is the director of the department that I work in. And these two departments together are the ones that see the contracts, monitor the contracts, make sure the contracts are put together correctly, so on and so forth. But one of the things that we talked about that we are going to move into the direction of introducing to our vendor community as well as our small business community are these other smaller municipalities and villages or townships or whatever they're called here in and throughout Chicago and surrounding areas. Because while Cook County, and we definitely are a huge proponent for Cook County because Sheena and I both work here and we always want to bring business to the county. But when we are trying to make sure that our vendors, and part of my job with my team is to make sure that the vendors are ready. We want to make sure that our vendors are both capable and ready. And when you think about capacity, capacity falls within 3 categories. There is the performance capacity, there's a financial capacity, and then there's also the human capacity. And as a business owner or a vendor who is looking to get into procurement and perform on these contracts, you want to make sure that you are humanly capable, you are financially capable, and you are performance capable, which means that you have a myriad of performance activity that a possible prime or an agency can look at and deem you as viable for being able to perform on these contracts. That's number one. You also want to make sure that you are financially capable, meaning that you have the reserve, the cash reserve, you have the financial capacity to be able to leverage yourself as a viable business opportunity when it comes to performance on contracts. And then you want to make sure that you are humanly capable, meaning that you have the staff, you have the people who can help you. You're not like a one-man show or a two-man show, but wanting to participate on larger contracts, because that translates over to you not being humanly capable. And so we find ourselves in our department, especially when goals are put out there and different things like that, we find that a lot of our businesses, even though we have able businesses in the pipeline, we don't necessarily have capable businesses. And so everybody on here is probably an able business. That means you have the ability to do whatever you have created your business to do. The problem that we find is that we don't have a lot of businesses that are capable. That means that if you were awarded a contract today, you have the capability of performing on that contract excellently without any issue. And so part of my job here in the Office of Contract Compliance, overseeing the Strategic Initiatives Division, is to make sure that vendors get ready and that they become capable, so that it's not an issue of whether or not someone wants to choose you. It's an issue of that they have to choose you because you are ready to perform on their contracts. And so what we want to do in terms of helping businesses build that performance capacity is we want to introduce you all to these other smaller municipalities, these other smaller townships, these other smaller cities, villages, Oak Forest, Oak Lawn, South Suburbs, Naperville, all these other different, Chicago is comprised of over 70 communities. Don't forget that these communities also have a procurement owner. And so everybody wants to always move towards the Cook counties and the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois and Metropolitan Water Reclamation District and Illinois Tollway and Illinois Department of Transportation. And we welcome everybody to come and do that. But if you want to better your chance at being able to be on these types of larger contracts, you have to give way to these smaller municipalities and these smaller opportunities where you can build your performance, because that's what's going to speak for you. Your capability statement you want your capability statement, and we do have a webinar on YouTube where we did a capability statements webinar, and it was phenomenally presented. So please go over there and check that out. But you want to make sure that your capability statement is jam-packed with performance that makes you viable. You don't ever want someone to look at your stuff and say, they have the ability to do it, but we can't use them as a subcontractor on this contract because they're just not able to do it. I'm sorry, they don't have the capacity to do it. They're able to do it. They have the expertise to do it, but they don't have the capacity to do it. And it's not going to allow us to get it done. So I just wanted to put that out there, that some of the stuff that we're working with over here in my shop with my team, where we are bringing these smaller municipalities to the table, and we're wanting to have conversations with Rafi and conversations with Nicole, and introducing these municipalities and these smaller townships to our vendors, because my job is not just to make sure that the vendor can get a contract with Cook County. My job is to make sure that vendors are ready, period. Yeah. And to be able to get contracts anywhere within the county or its collar counties. So I just want you all to be on the lookout for that. And understand that there's so many nuances and so many moving parts to you becoming a viable and able and ready and capable vendor. It's not just about what we're talking about today. This is the end of it. Like, this is how you actually put your stuff out there so that you can get the opportunity. But prior to all of this is making sure that you have that human capacity, you have that financial capacity, and you have that performance capacity. And we have a number of resources that, if businesses are ready to be extended a line of credit, if businesses are ready to be extended loans or whatever they need to help build their capacity financially, we have those resources for you. But we just want you to know where you need to be in order to be capable for that. So I'm going to get off my soapbox. I just wanted to make sure that you all knew that, because we do have some stuff coming down the pipe. And we just want to make sure that you all are ready in every way possible. So thank you again, Sheena.
I do want to piggyback off something that you said really,
Mhm.
really quickly. I think it's
Yep.
beautiful that compliance has been talking about this, and, getting vendors involved with the smaller municipalities, the different suburbs of Cook County. One of the things that Rafi and I discussed was giving vendors information on the procurement websites for some of our municipalities. So we went through all of the several suburbs of Cook County, and we outlined the top 25 by population, and we're going to start posting the procurement websites for those. If you click on that link, it'll take you directly to their vendor portal where you can see their opportunities. I know a lot of vendors may not know that just because they're bidding with Cook County, there are several suburbs of Cook County, several cities and villages within Cook County that are separate from our procurement portal. So we want to make sure we point that out too. So to your point, we're doing the same thing. So that is coming down the pipeline. Also, we'll be posting these things. We've already gone through the president's office and vetted this. We're going to be posting on our website soon, and it will be in the buying plan for 2025. All of the links to the top 25 suburbs of Cook County, to their specific procurement portal and their opportunity pages. So you guys have that at your fingertips also.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that, Sheena. That's super, super, super important. So as you all can see, we are all working to make sure that you all have every opportunity possible to be successful. Okay. Cook County isn't your first resort. Because we notice that people get really frustrated when they're not able to get through a Cook County or the city of Chicago or the much larger agencies, but there's a way to get to where you are no longer frustrated. And that's what we're trying to develop you in. So with that said, thank you all so much for being here. We are going to definitely continue bringing you more webinar trainings and development from a professional standpoint and from a personal standpoint. If you're not connected with me, to get our bulletins, make sure that in the email that you are sent from me, that you click on that link to sign up for updates from the Office of Contract Compliance. All right, you all, our next one is next Tuesday, and then on the 20th, and then on the 21st, which is Wednesday, we have the Fireside Procurement Chat with myself, Rafi, and Nicole, and we're featuring the Executive Director of the Office of Business Diversity at Chicago Public Schools, Ms. Tina Lori Harris. So she'll be our guest on there. So you definitely want to make sure that you register for that as well and find out about the Chicago Public School opportunities. All right, you guys have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.